What happens when a prominent Democratic politician decides her own party has betrayed America? For Tulsi Gabbard, the answer wasn't just switching parties. It was becoming a vocal critic of Democratic leadership on national television. From nominating Bernie Sanders at the 2016 convention to becoming a Fox News regular endorsing Trump-aligned candidates, Gabbard's transformation raises profound questions. Was this a principled stand against corruption or a strategic career pivot? Join us as we examine the timeline and strategic decisions behind this remarkable political shift. The evidence we've gathered reveals surprising patterns that challenge conventional narratives about party loyalty and political conviction. Picture this: a rising political star who went from being the youngest person ever elected to Hawaii's state legislature to a high-ranking Democratic National Committee official. The same woman who boldly endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016 when most of the establishment backed Hillary Clinton. Tulsi Gabbard was viewed as the future of the Democratic Party. So how did she become its fiercest critic? Gabbard's political journey began impressively. Elected to the Hawaii State House at just 21 years old in 2002, she voluntarily stepped away from politics to serve 2 military deployments in the Middle East as part of the Hawaii Army National Guard. These combat experiences in Iraq fundamentally shaped her worldview, eventually becoming the foundation for foreign policy positions that would set her at odds with Democratic leadership. Upon returning from service, Gabbard ascended rapidly, winning a seat on the Honolulu City Council in 2010, then entering Congress in 2012. By 2013, she was appointed vice chair of the DNC, marking her as an emerging party leader. Her progressive credentials strengthened when she resigned from this DNC position in 2016 to endorse Bernie Sanders, a move that initially endeared her to the party's left wing while creating tension with establishment figures. The first significant rupture with party leadership occurred in January 2017. Gabbard took an unauthorized trip to Syria, meeting directly with President Bashar al-Assad amid the brutal civil war. While she defended it as a peace-seeking fact-finding mission, Democratic leaders condemned the visit. Nancy Pelosi publicly distanced the party, declaring it was not an official visit, a rebuke that highlighted the growing divide between Gabbard and mainstream Democrats. This foreign policy independence stemmed directly from her military background. Gabbard consistently opposed what she termed regime change wars, criticizing American interventionism in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. These positions attracted supporters across the political spectrum while alienating her from hawkish Democrats. By her 2020 presidential campaign announcement in January 2019, the gulf between Gabbard and party leadership had widened considerably. During primary debates, she generated headlines by directly challenging Kamala Harris over her prosecutorial record. Despite these attention-grabbing moments, institutional support evaporated. Democratic fundraising networks bypassed her campaign, and party-adjacent media largely overlooked her candidacy. The decisive moment came during Trump's first impeachment. In December 2019, Gabbard voted present rather than yes or no on both articles. While she called it a vote for America, former Senator Claire McCaskill voiced the party's frustration. That's just stupid. I mean, what is the point? I don't know what this woman is accomplishing by that. Following this vote, Gabbard's isolation accelerated dramatically. Committee assignments dwindled, speaking opportunities disappeared, and fundraising support vanished. She opted not to seek re-election to Congress in 2020. As her Democratic ties deteriorated, Gabbard shifted to conservative media platforms, appearing over 70 times on Fox News between 2020 and 2022, primarily on Tucker Carlson's show. She launched her own podcast criticizing Democratic policies and began speaking at conservative events. The final break came on October 11, 2022, when Gabbard announced her departure from the Democratic Party in a scathing video, accusing it of being under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers. Weeks later, she actively campaigned for Republican candidates in the midterm elections, completing her transformation from Democratic rising star to conservative media darling. While conservative media figures like Rogan welcomed Gabbard with open arms, what many failed to notice was the surgical precision with which she dismantled her former party. Unlike typical political defectors who simply expressed disagreement before fading into obscurity, Gabbard deployed a three-pronged attack strategy that targeted the Democrats' most vulnerable pressure points, areas where polling consistently shows they're weakest with moderate and independent voters. Gabbard's first line of attack centered on foreign policy, an area where her military background gave her unique credibility. She methodically painted Democratic leadership as warmongers, a characterization that directly contradicted the party's carefully cultivated self-image as peace advocates. This framing tapped into growing voter skepticism about military interventions. Like a seasoned general identifying enemy vulnerabilities, she positioned herself as the peace candidate with combat experience, creating powerful cognitive dissonance for voters. Here was a veteran claiming the supposedly anti-war party actively pushed for conflict. Her military credentials made this critique devastatingly effective. When she questioned the party's national security priorities, she spoke from first-hand experience in combat zones. Military families and veterans, increasingly alienated by Democratic policies, found her message compelling. Her implicit questions struck deep. If a combat veteran believes Democrats endanger national security, shouldn't you be concerned too? Building on this foundation of foreign policy criticism, Gabbard then shifted to her second target, identity politics. She calculated her language with precision, connecting with voters worried about progressive overreach. Rather than making vague complaints, she specifically challenged what she characterized as the party's fixation on racial and gender issues at the expense of broader American concerns. Polls consistently showed significant portions of independents harbored concerns that wokeness had gone too far. Gabbard's critique spoke directly to this sentiment. Her own background as a woman of color criticizing identity politics made it difficult for Democrats to dismiss her as speaking from privilege. Instead, she framed her opposition as a return to core American values, suggesting Democrats hadn't just gotten policy wrong, but had abandoned fundamental principles that once defined the party. The third element of her strategy involved strategic media choices. Like a tactical commander selecting advantageous terrain, Gabbard appeared on platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Tucker Carlson's show, venues reaching demographics Democrats struggle with: young men, veterans, rural voters, and the politically disaffected. Through these carefully selected channels, her criticisms reached audiences unlikely to encounter them through mainstream political coverage. What began as policy disagreements evolved into a fundamental values challenge. Gabbard framed her opposition not just as differing on specific issues, but as standing against a party that had lost its way. This transformation, from specific complaints to comprehensive indictment, amplified her impact beyond typical partisan criticism. The effectiveness of this approach became evident as Republican candidates in competitive districts adopted her specific criticisms. Her talking points about Democratic warmongers, woke ideology, and censorship appeared in GOP campaign materials targeting vulnerable Democratic seats. By providing a template from someone claiming intimate knowledge of the party's inner workings, Gabbard gave Republicans a powerful electoral weapon that continues to shape political discourse beyond her own career trajectory. Gabbard's exodus from the Democratic Party mirrors the dramatic fractures we opened with, fundamental cracks in the coalition that can't be easily plastered over. What makes her departure significant is how it forces conversations many party officials would prefer to avoid. Behind closed doors, other Democratic leaders recognize these same vulnerabilities, questions about policy direction and messaging priorities that fail to resonate beyond the party's base. The real test isn't countering Gabbard as an individual, but addressing the substantive criticisms she articulated. Until leadership reckons with these deeper issues, they risk watching others follow her template, transforming from loyal members to powerful critics. Is this the beginning of a political earthquake that will ultimately reshape the Democratic landscape? Join us next week as we explore the aftershocks.